We're going to get started here. I have to tell you, it is so good to see everybody in person. Woo! My name is Christine Dursey Davis. I'm the Executive Director of the Ohio chapter of APA. I know so many of your faces. If I haven't seen you, come say hey. I'm hanging out over there. We also have an APA table. If you're not a member of APA, come talk to me. Let's talk about it. We have some treats and things over there as well. So feel free to come over and say hello. Welcome to the Cleveland Planning and Zoning Workshop. Again, it's so good to see everybody. Before we have our keynote speaker, we have some awards to give out. And I will turn it over now to the APA Ohio Chapter President, Rachel Ray. She is the Economic Development Director for the city of Westerville, which is in the Columbus region, super cute little town. So I'm going to turn it over to Rachel to kick things off so that we can present a couple awards here. Rachel.
All right, well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for allowing me to be here and for the kind introduction, Chris. Again, serving as chapter president for the American Planning Association, Ohio chapter. I'm actually finishing out my term. It kind of stinks to have to be president during COVID. I didn't have a chance to really get out and get the full experience of meeting as many of you. But again, like Chris, I'll be hanging out here as well. If you have thoughts or opinions, please stop by. And I also encourage all of you to please get involved in your local Cleveland section as well and continue to stay engaged with the chapter membership. I'm very pleased to be here this afternoon to assist with the presentation of the Great Places in Ohio Awards presentation that, incidentally, all involve places in Northeast Ohio. Perfect timing. All right, so APA Ohio is pleased to announce the winners of the 2022 Ohio APA Great Places Awards. This is a biennial awards program that honors outstanding physical spaces that planners have made permanent through careful planning and unbridled imagination in Ohio. Let's see if this mic is a little bit better. Nope.
They're going to try to get
okay, all right, good. So this program is a great opportunity for our members and our communities to shine the spotlight on planning success stories and communicate with pride to our citizens, decision makers, and stakeholders that it is only because we plan that great places exist in Ohio. Our 2022 designees were selected from submissions for great commercial districts, public spaces or places, and residential neighborhoods from communities large and small from across the state. The entries represented beautiful designs, inspiring stories, and community-led transformations that honor their unique histories. The applications were reviewed and scored by members of the awards committee of the APA Ohio board that have representation throughout the state, and they evaluated the nominations based on the following criteria: character, personality of place, uniqueness of the place, special history, how the space is used, planning initiative, and visual attributes through photographs. For 2022, we've selected 3 entries to be inducted as Great Places in Ohio, to be commemorated by these signs here on the stage. These not only demonstrate the traits I just mentioned, but places that have grown to be embraced and loved by their respective communities, giving them the holistic package necessary to become a great place in Ohio. So what I'm going to do is I'll introduce the 3 places, and for each one, I'd like to ask a representative from their communities to come up and get a picture and to take their sign with them. So the very first one I'd like to present is, the category is public space or place, and for that, we'd like to recognize Jackson Street Pier in Sandusky, Ohio. We'll do a quick picture. All right. Come on up. Come on now. Great. Hold on a second.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, go.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
All right, I'm going to give a brief introduction here of what this is. So in operation since 1900 as a parking lot and waiting area for oncoming ferries, the Jackson Street Pier was transformed in 2019 in the city of Sandusky's premier open space. This 4-acre destination waterfront amenity invites tens of thousands of residents and visitors to enjoy year-round family-friendly entertainment, scenic views of Sandusky Bay, daily recreational opportunities, festivals, events of all scales, and it remains in operation as a local and international port. The pier is walkable to downtown local restaurants and vendors, all within Sandusky's designated outdoor refreshment area, or DORA. Pier visitors support local businesses while they enjoy pier programming or simply sit and watch the activity of sailboats, freighter ships, and other watercraft. The idea of transforming Jackson Street Pier into a destination public space was grounded in community planning and elevated as a priority in the 2018 Bicentennial Vision Comprehensive Plan. This plan engaged more than 6,500 community members to establish a strategic vision and specific direction for the city. The $8.3 million Jackson Street Pier Transformation Project, along with the neighboring $10 million Shoreline Drive transformation with Sandusky Bay Pathway multi-use path connectivity, were identified as top community priorities and have been implemented since the Bicentennial Plan's adoption. Congratulations. With the goal of increasing waterfront access, the pier design was a community-led process with a representative steering committee, stakeholder interviews, and public open houses. The public process identified guiding principles for the pier design to ensure the new pier retained all its existing uses, continued to include vehicular access and parking at the north end, increased accessibility for all ages and abilities, and included new, beautiful, flexible spaces to expand the pier's usability and attraction. The project scope also includes drainage improvements, stormwater management, new catch basins, and green infrastructure. The design process was led by City Architecture with an engineering and construction including Donnelly's, KS Associates, Osborne Engineering, and OHM Advisors. The pier design, paired with the transformation of neighboring Shoreline Drive from an industrial access road to a premier public street with multi-use pathway connectivity, were the largest single public space improvement projects the City of Sandusky has completed in decades. So Jackson Street Pier is a unique, inclusive destination public space celebrated by the Sandusky community and embraced by visitors across Ohio and beyond. One more time, congratulations to the City of Sandusky. Okay, the second is for a commercial district, and for that, we'd like to honor downtown Willoughby. Historic downtown Willoughby is a beautiful, quaint, and charming neighborhood and was listed as a historic district on the National Register of Historic Places in 1995 for its commerce and architectural significance from the 1850s to the 1940s. Downtown Willoughby now is a bustling, eclectic community with something to offer everyone who lives, works, and plays in the area. There are over 65 buildings and sites listed on the National Register of Historic Places, ranging from Greek Revival, Gothic Revival, Italianate, and Classical Revival styles. Today, they serve as boutique shops and restaurants, churches, coffee shops, bars, bed and breakfasts, and residential homes. West Point Park, also included in the beautiful historic district, is the heart of the town. You can see it on the screen here. Nestled right beside the beautiful Chagrin River is Todd Field. Aside from all the shopping and delicious restaurant options, downtown Willoughby also hosts a ton of fun and exciting events and festivals year-round, from the Saturday Outdoor Farmers Market at City Hall and concerts at West Point Park, all summer long to the Miracle on Erie Street tree lighting. These events showcase the charming downtown and draw thousands of visitors from all over Northeast Ohio. With downtown Willoughby being considered a historic district, the City of Willoughby follows strict planning initiatives to protect the historic integrity of the neighborhood. The City of Willoughby provides detailed design guidelines, and with these standards, downtown Willoughby is able to keep a concise and historically accurate look. Downtown Willoughby's distinctive character and charm help attract events, businesses, and visitors from all over Northeast Ohio. The small town feel and planning initiatives that support it are what make the town beautiful, safe, and walkable. In short, a great place. Congratulations to the City of Willoughby.
Congratulations. Thank you.
And one final award to present here this afternoon. This is for the Public Space or Place category, and the honoree is Mentor Marsh State Nature Preserve in Mentor, Ohio. The Mentor Marsh is a lively and buzzing place to be. It is maintained, protected, and restored by the Cleveland Museum of Natural History, the City of Mentor, and the Ohio Department of Natural Resources, Division of Natural Areas and Preserves. Let's see. Because of the rate of development in Ohio, over 90% of wetlands in the state have been drained. In the 1960s, the Cleveland Museum of Natural History obtained the marsh in order to save it from becoming a marina. Over the years, acquiring almost 700 total acres of wetland area, including the majority of the marsh. Today, Mentor Marsh is one of the largest natural marshes that still remains along the shores of Lake Erie. The wetland is situated between Mentor Lagoons and Headlands Beach State Park. This makes the area a great place for different animal and plant species to thrive. In 1971, Mentor Marsh became the first nature preserve in Ohio, but it has been a national natural landmark since 1996. The National Park Service designated the marsh as such for being so rich in species along Lake Erie, and it is recognized as an important birding area by the National Audubon Society, one of the top in the region. However, the marsh has faced many struggles in its long and dirty history, from challenges in the 1960s resulting from its neighbor, the Morton Salt Company, to non-native invasive species that made the marshlands vulnerable to fire. After a fire devastated over 10 acres of the park in the 1980s, the Cleveland Museum of Natural History created a plan to eliminate the invasive species and restore the marsh, and improving it with improved paths and wildlife preserves. Today, the marsh is home to roughly 4 miles of hiking trails that allow visitors up close and personal with the wildlife the park has to offer, while observing the innovative and ongoing restoration efforts of the Cleveland Museum of Natural History. As part of the horticulture job skills program at the local prison, inmates collected and propagated seeds to be planted there, while other plants were purchased from sustainable nurseries and seed growers. Because of these efforts, native plants are sprouting, rare birds are returning, and the marsh is becoming a stopover habitat for many animals, such as otter, beaver, waterfowl, and shorebirds. One more time, congratulations to the Mentor Marsh State Nature Preserve. One more picture. The same thing. Right. It's the same thing. Maybe it'll be better.
Good. I'll approve those later. And if you need to keep your signs up by us for the rest of the day, that's totally fine.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, thanks for everyone for being patient as we talked about these great places in Ohio. Hopefully you'll have a chance to visit them, and thank you all for being here today. And with that, I'd like to introduce our Cleveland Section Director, Arthur Schmidt.
Well, thank you, everybody. Really quick, before we introduce our keynote speaker, I just want to take this opportunity to thank our sponsors. First, our host sponsor, the College of Education and Public Affairs here at Cleveland State University. Our breakfast sponsor, the Cuyahoga County Planning. Our 2 room sponsors, Envision and GPD Group. Our networking sponsor, OHM Advisors. And our event sponsors, MS Consultants and RDL Architects. I also wanted to thank our workshop committee. These individuals have worked very hard to organize and put together this event. I want to thank our student volunteers who helped with the setup, registration, our logistics here today. Our speakers, all of our speakers this morning and this afternoon for sharing their knowledge and time with us and with all of you. I want to thank, in terms of organizing this workshop, I really want to thank Cleveland State University and the staff today, especially Bob Martell, Tom Hildy, Steve Antel, and Kia Scott. They've been tremendous help to help put this together today. And thank all of you. I know this is our first kind of big in-person event since all the virtual meetings, so we really appreciate it. Again, there's a lot of hard work that goes into this, so thank you to everyone who helped put this together. And now I'd like to introduce our keynote speaker. So Terry Schwartz is the director of Kent State University's Cleveland Urban Design Collaborative. Her work at the CUDC includes neighborhood and campus planning, commercial and residential design guidelines, and ecological strategies for vacant land reuse. Terry launched the CUDC's Shrinking Cities Institute in 2005 in an effort to understand and address the implications of population decline and large-scale urban vacancy in Northeast Ohio. As an outgrowth of the Shrinking Cities Institute, she established Pop-Up City, a temporary use initiative for vacant and underutilized sites in Cleveland. In 2009, Terry received the Cleveland Arts Prize for Design. She teaches in the graduate design curriculum for the KSU College of Architecture and Environmental Design. And so with that, I'd like to introduce our keynote speaker, Terry Schwartz.
Hello, everyone. It's amazing to be here in a room with so many familiar faces. It's been a long time. So, and thank you to the Cleveland section of APA Ohio and to our hosts at Cleveland State. I actually really love being the lunch speaker because, you know, everybody is in a good mood. You just had lunch. And also, like, I was given the instructions that I could talk about anything I wanted to, as long as I don't talk too long, which I won't do. So I was trying to think about like what might be interesting to a group from as diverse a range of communities who are represented in this room. I know that some of you work in large cities and some in smaller communities. And so what I settled on maybe was a little conversation about population dynamics and climate change, and also, you know, kind of some potential scenarios, you know, kind of for the future of our region. What you're looking at here is a postcard that was produced by an artist, Janine Shablisky, who worked with us at the CUDC some years ago. And she is the professor and the provost of CalArts in San Francisco. And she enjoyed coming to Cleveland, particularly because she felt like a lot of the kind of trends that happen nationally really kind of begin in older industrial cities in the Great Lakes, that we're sort of a bellwether of things to come. And you might think that that's a strange thing to say for somebody in San Francisco to think about, you know, kind of our region as being on the cusp of things, since certainly the Bay Area is where a lot of the technological innovation is coming forward. But her viewpoint, which I share, is that in a region where we have dealt with a lot of stuff over time, that you know, kind of we develop a certain kind of resilience and also a resourcefulness that enables us to respond to conditions as they, you know, kind of as they emerge and as our communities change. So what I was going to, you know, kind of focus on primarily is thinking about, you know, kind of the potential impacts on our region if, you know, kind of people begin to move around in this country in response to climate emergencies. Because as Arthur mentioned in the intro, you know, we've been working on issues of population loss and urban vacancy for a really long time. And as long as we've been having these conversations, the same narrative keeps coming up that, you know, when the West runs out of water, you know, when the East Coast is maybe underwater, well, they'll be back, right? People will come back to Cleveland, to Detroit, to the cities of the Great Lakes, because by comparison, you know, kind of we are, you know, kind of in a more stable part of the country. And so we've been doing some work around just kind of adding some nuance to that conversation, because here's the thing. You know, this question of sea level rise isn't hypothetical anymore, right? I mean, the map that you see on your right shows the level of sea level rise since 1950, and it's significant. On the left, you see Hurricane Sandy and the impacts that, you know, kind of it had on New York City. And of course, nobody really needs reminding of this. It happened just a couple of weeks ago, but these kinds of, you know, kind of big storms, the flooding, the hurricanes, the issues are really impacting parts of the country in a really dramatic way. And so, you know, kind of this envisioned future where other parts of the country may need to, you know, kind of rethink their land use strategies, I think to some extent that moment is upon us. Okay, drought, right? I mean, we talk about Las Vegas, about Arizona, about California running out of water. I know that, you know, kind of as planners, you probably follow these stories that, you know, kind of we're in the midst in the Southwest of the worst drought in 1,200 years. And until I started reading the research, I didn't even realize we could project that far back in the past. But this moment of water scarcity, again, it's upon us. And as a corollary of that, you know, kind of wildfires are not unusual anymore. They've become just kind of part of life in big parts of the country. And so if we really believe that, you know, kind of the Great Lakes represents a safe haven, given the fact that we are centrally located, that we have ample access to fresh water, and that the forces of climate change have been less noticeable here, then when would this kind of population in-migration begin to happen? Has it already happened? Is it already underway? And what do we mean by that? When we say they'll be back, like who's the they, right? I mean, is it people and businesses coming with resources to our region? Is it, kind of people coming under duress when the places, the communities they've made their homes are, kind of increasingly difficult places to live? So this is some work that was done, just recently by the McHarg Center at the University of Pennsylvania. And I don't know if you can, kind of see the key, but it shows areas that are most at risk from wildfires, earthquakes, floods, and hurricanes. And you'll see us, can you see my little arrow? You can. You see us here, kind of in Northeast Ohio as this kind of island of calm amidst the, kind of environmental catastrophes happening elsewhere in the country. So what if, right? I mean, what if, as, kind of challenges on the coastal areas in the Southwest become more extreme, kind of what if people are then beginning to choose to move here? How do we plan for it, right? I mean, group of planners, I think we can think about, ways that we can, kind of structure our land use plans, our strategic plans, our comprehensive plans. How can we think about this as not something that's definite, right? Because we don't know for sure what's going to happen and when. But how can we begin to anticipate the possibilities of what might happen? I think before we do that, though, we should come to terms with the fact that, kind of, there's no such thing as a climate haven, right? I mean, this is us, right? Cleveland, kind of, it floods here. Sometimes floods here quite a lot. We're not immune to volatile weather patterns, extreme weather, big storms. So the idea that somehow that we will be spared from the, kind of the hazards and damages of climate change is untrue. I wasn't going to say unlikely, it's already untrue because the impacts of climate change are already being felt here. So one of the tools I think maybe that puts a little bit finer point on it. If you haven't used Risk Factor, this is an image from Flood Factor. This is a really helpful tool. I try to be useful even though it's kind of the fun lunch talk. Flood Factor, if you haven't used it, is a pretty interesting tool. You can look anywhere in the country at a site as specific as one parcel or as large as a kind of entire zip code, and you can see where the flood risks are. I don't have time to explain the whole methodology, but if you go to firststreet.org, the whole methodology is explained on the site. But it's not just floods, it's also heat and fire, so that you can see kind of what areas at a really fine-grained level are most at risk. If I had time, I would pull up, I was looking at my own neighborhood this morning, and my street is fine, but a few blocks away, kind of the risks of flooding are significantly higher. So it's a useful tool, especially if you're thinking about, kind of development and also green space and green infrastructure, to really understand the nuances, because, kind of when we talk about Northeast Ohio as a climate haven, or even as a place that's relatively safe, I think it helps to look a little bit more closely at the variations within our region. Okay, so you might not normally look to Rolling Stone magazine for your climate data. I show you this slide from Rolling Stone in 2018 about the winners and losers of climate migration, only to show you the extent to which this kind of conversation is beginning to permeate, kind of popular culture. According to Rolling Stone, the northern parts of the country are likely to be the big winners of climate migration, where areas to the south, kind of might potentially see economic and population losses. But is it true? I don't know. They're projecting out to 2080, and we know as planners, the farther you look in the distance, the more opportunities for uncertainty and errors exist. But some cities are already beginning to capitalize on this question. This is Duluth, Minnesota, branding themselves as a climate haven. Duluth is a lovely city, right? But I do think it's going to take more than kind of declaring yourself a climate haven in order to actually prepare for the realities of it. Cincinnati is beginning to sort of talk about, and Buffalo for sure, talk about their cities in terms of being a climate haven. Buffalo, we'll talk about it in a minute, but Buffalo, kind of has some weather, no question about it. There's been some pushback against, kind of this way of thinking. Yeah, it's 2100 and everyone's moving to Duluth, maybe. But, kind of, can a city really be climate proof if we haven't really dealt with the environmental impacts that are already affecting our most vulnerable populations? And also, really importantly, kind of, isn't this a moment where we can think about, if we're thinking about national land use strategies, isn't this a moment to also begin to really recognize and wrestle with the realities of indigenous land rights and water rights? Before we start inviting the world into the Great Lakes, maybe we should really think about, kind of who these resources belong to and how they can be, kind of best maximized for the benefits of most people. So some of the questions in our work that we've been exploring, kind of, what would the barriers be, right? Because, I mean, if parts of the country are already on fire and experiencing water shortages or underwater, kind of, why hasn't this already happened? What are the barriers that would keep people from moving to the Great Lakes region? Kind of, and how do social ties and, kind of family connections and, kind of the place-based attachment ideas affect people's decisions to move? Because here's the thing that happens, right? In New Orleans, in 2005, I'm sure you don't need to be reminded of how horrible the hurricanes were and how many people were, kind of really harmed by that, kind of by those big storms. When people left New Orleans because their houses and their neighborhoods were uninhabitable, they didn't necessarily come to the Great Lakes. What we did see a lot of, if you track where population moved, people moved to places where their climate risk was the same or greater than the place that they had just left. So a lot of people kind of, for instance, went to Houston. Here's a map again from the McHarg Center that shows the Katrina diaspora. The biggest arrow from New Orleans went to Houston, which, 10 years later was hit by an epic hurricane, right? So people aren't necessarily doing the calculation in their heads, where can I go? Kind of where, kind of it'll be safer and more stable. And, kind of, when people do make the decisions, it tends to be like, is there a place nearby? Do I have family connections? Can I find a job? So if we think about, kind of what the barriers to in-migration would be, this is one of them, is that the patterns of migration aren't necessarily pointing our way, at least not yet. And so thinking about, kind of what it would mean to really plan for in-migration might also mean preparing the infrastructure so that if people did choose to move to our region, that we could accommodate, kind of those movements. So another thing that happens, this is from this past summer, kind of the western half of the country was really hot, and look at us, pleasant and dry. I mean, this was sort of my memory of the summer as well. But it doesn't necessarily mean that when people choose to relocate, they're necessarily, again, going to come here. The slide on the left is California heat wave. The slide on the right is Arizona heat wave. If you watch like housing patterns, during the pandemic, a lot of people were moving out of California because they could work remotely. But, they weren't necessarily moving to Duluth. A lot of people were moving into Phoenix, and you can track it in housing values in Phoenix that just went through the roof because of the pressure of people moving, kind of largely from California, where, I mean, really, frying pan into fire, right? I mean, it's like, what I'm trying to make the point here is that climate isn't necessarily the determining factor. Now, one kind of interesting exception to that might be kind of the people who were impacted by Hurricane Maria in Puerto Rico. What the city of Buffalo, which like Cleveland has been losing population since the 1950s, the city of Buffalo actually experienced a population uptick in 2020 for the first time in decades. And it's largely believed that, kind of a big chunk of that population growth is represented by people moving from Puerto Rico to Buffalo. So it's not that it's impossible, it just means that the infrastructure and the family ties need to be in place. Again, it doesn't necessarily mean people are moving from an at-risk climate area to a place that's a perfect haven, as we could see in Buffalo. They get a lot of snow there. And so how do we kind of prepare for these kind of potential movements? So the work that we've been doing in partnership with the University of Buffalo and the Lincoln Institute of Land Policy and Cuyahoga County Office of Sustainability has been around scenario planning for climate migration. I don't know how many of you have worked with scenario planning tools. This was sort of the introduction to scenario planning for me. I'm just going to give you a sort of really brief overview. Scenario planning tends to fall into three big buckets. Normative scenario planning is what we usually envision as scenario planning. That's like envisioning a desired outcome and then imagining and planning for a variety of scenarios and choosing the one that's going to get you to the place you want to go. Normative scenario planning came out of military research, but is also used sometimes in growing communities, like here's the place we want to be, here are the steps and the buildings and the infrastructure we need to do to get to that place. Predictive scenario planning is more like, if we do this, then what would happen? And a really good example of predictive scenario planning that many of you might be familiar with is the Vibrant NEO 2040 plan that was done a few years ago and is, kind of ongoing through NOACA, that said, if we keep doing what we're doing, we're going to see, kind of a little bit of population growth in our region, a little bit of employment growth, but we're going to see a lot of housing abandonment. So the predictive scenario planning looked at, kind of here are some paths that we could take, and here are the likely outcomes, kind of based on which path that we choose. The last one, and the one that I'm actually going to focus on, is exploratory scenario planning. Exploratory scenario planning isn't like, what do we want to happen? It's more a question of what could happen. What's the whole range of plausible, possible future scenarios? And what do they each mean? And how do we then begin to plan as a region, as individual cities, even down to the neighborhood scale, for what might come? The nice thing about exploratory scenario planning is that it's narrative-based. It's basically storytelling with data, and it doesn't require sophisticated modeling, expert knowledge, and specialized staff. Exploratory scenario planning is something that you could weave into any of the planning processes that you're working on. So if you're doing a climate action plan, if you're doing a neighborhood master plan, if you're doing a comprehensive plan, you can include some conversation about this kind of what if. What if in the future our community begins to see an increase in people coming to the community because the places where they are currently living have become increasingly uninhabitable? How do we begin to think about, kind of what population growth could look like, particularly in cities like Cleveland, Youngstown, et cetera, that have been dealing with population loss for so long? Again, the important thing to think about is the farther out in the time horizon, the more uncertainty there is. But exploratory scenario planning is really one of the best tools for dealing with uncertainty. And in this moment, we're all kind of dealing, with a lot of uncertainty. I'm not going to go through all of these, but the idea here is that, what are all the things we're uncertain, unsure about? Is our population going to decline? Is it going to grow? Will we see a gradual influx of residents from other parts of the country, or will we see a sudden influx if something, kind of really traumatic happens in another part of the country? Will people be coming here as refugees, people with needs who've lost everything due to, kind of a climate condition? Or will people and businesses start arriving with resources who can reinvest in our communities? There are challenges with both of those things. The important thing about exploratory scenario planning is that it doesn't weight one idea over another as being a preferred scenario. It really is a kind of objective exploration of what's possible. And those are the demographic uncertainties. We also have climate uncertainties. Will climate change be moderate in our region? Will it be severe? Will incoming people, resettle in existing communities, or will they, kind of develop at the periphery of our region? Kind of will we continue to develop as we have been, or will we embrace more sustainable practices? How do we think about infrastructure? There's a lot of questions here. And so really, I'm just going to show you a couple of examples so that you get a sense in your head about how exploratory scenario planning might work in your community. So here's a possible scenario, right? The red sort of y-axis here is population. So in our region, what if population grows or declines? And then on the other axis, it's like climate impacts. Are the climate impacts moderate, or are they severe? I think for a lot of us, when we think about the they'll be back scenario, it's the upper left corner. Sorry, I'm terribly dyslexic, so if I tell the wrong direction, it's just because I can't tell my left from the right very easily. But the scenario that, kind of I think a lot of people envision is that climate change will be relatively moderate or mild here in Northeast Ohio, and people will begin to come back. So that's one possibility. But it's also possible, because the climate is changing here too, that we may see population growth at the same time that we're experiencing increasingly severe climate impacts. That's the upper right scenario. The lower right is if we see population loss and severe climate impacts, and the lower left would be, kind of moderate impacts and population decline, which I would argue is the scenario that we're looking at right now. We're already dealing with issues of climate change, and we're experiencing, kind of an ongoing decline in population. The important thing to keep in mind here is that it's hard to know which of these scenarios will play out, but we kind of have to be prepared for any of them. And so developing strategies that allow us to be nimble and respond to conditions as they emerge is a really important part of scenario planning. And at the very first step, having these conversations in your communities is key. Because if we only have this kind of simple view that people will be returning to our region, but we haven't thought through the challenges and opportunities of that, then we're not going to be ready for what comes next. So here's just an example, a simple exercise that, kind of anyone could do. So if the y-axis is population growth and the x-axis is moderate versus severe climate impacts, you could engage a focus group, have a conversation, a community workshop, kind of asking people to imagine what that would be like. So if the population is growing and the climate, impacts are fairly moderate, we may have more people, we may have more resources, more businesses, a larger tax base, but there's a risk of displacement, particularly for the most vulnerable people in our communities. And so how would we manage an uptick of population at the same time protecting the people who've been here all along and making sure people have access to opportunities? On the upper right, kind of what if population growth happens and we have severe climate impacts? That would suggest that, kind of climate change is bad here, but worse elsewhere in the country. So that would mean that we're fighting for increasingly scarce federal resources, really putting at risk people with disabilities, people with lower incomes, aging populations, because people coming into our region, kind of and jockeying for position in a time of, kind of dire distress could get really difficult. On the bottom, we look at, kind of what if our population continues to decline, and maybe that decline speeds up. If we have serious climate impacts, people might be moving out of our region rather than into it. And at the bottom, kind of bottom left is status quo. Kind of how can we continue and expand the things that we're doing to address moderate climate impacts with a population that maybe is continuing at a slow rate to decline. Let me just give you another one, and then we'll move on. This scenario envisions at the regional level that the population would be growing at the top or declining at the bottom. Where would that population go, right? If we talk about people coming back, are they going to be repopulating our existing cities? Last I checked, the city of Cleveland has about 30,000 vacant lots. I mean, are we talking about people moving into our region and infill development filling those spaces? Or are we thinking about development happening at the periphery of the region? So this just begins to, kind of, it's hard to see, so let's go to the next one, to map out what some of those things could look like. So this is that upper left corner. This is growing population with the development happening at the periphery of our region. Potentially, if a lot of people were to move to our region, we might have to create, kind of large new cities to accommodate that growth. The image on the right is kind of not serious, but it's Masdar outside of Abu Dhabi, a city that was designed to be a, kind of a carbon neutral city. I say this kind of cautiously only because Masdar of late has had a lot of challenges. It was designed, though, to have, kind of renewable energy and, kind of easy transit access and high efficient housing. Right now, it's a little bit of a ghost town, but, kind of what happens next in Masdar is anybody's guess. My point though here is that, if we did see a really significant surge in population, we might have to think about large development. And if we did, kind of, is there a way to make sure that that development isn't contributing to greenhouse gas emissions, which has gotten us to this place we're in the first place? If those developments at the periphery are energy efficient, what does that mean for people who get left behind in the core cities, where there's aging infrastructure, aging housing stock, and kind of less access to opportunity. These are questions at the regional scale that we'd have to wrestle with. This would be the upper right corner of that diagram, declining population and spreading development footprint. The image on the right is something that I pulled from Vibrant Neo 2040 that imagines 2040 if we continue developing the way that we have been without significant population growth, but a continuing spread of development. There are lots of both positive and negative things about each of these scenarios. That's all I'm sort of trying to suggest here, is that for each one, we really need to kind of think about it in a little bit more detail. If we're really committed to repopulating existing cities, this is a hypothetical drawing that we made at our shop of Opportunity Corridor at East 79th Street. I'm just going to say really briefly, this is hard, and any of you who've done infill development know that this is true. Existing brownfield sites have lots of issues that need to be addressed. The parcels are never where you want them to be, of the scale you need them to be. It's hard. Doing development, infill development is difficult. It can be done, kind of at a scale, but if the number of, kind of people moving to our region and the number of businesses moving here, it's going to be increasingly difficult to try to squeeze that in kind of Jenga style into the existing fabric of our cities. Same with infill housing. Infill housing is fantastic, especially in a city with so many vacant lots. But if we're talking about, kind of tens of thousands of people rather than hundreds or thousands of people, doing infill development like this would be really difficult, both because, kind of scattered site development is always more challenging than large development sites. And if people are arriving here with needs, having people clustered together, it's easier to serve those needs if they're in one place rather than, kind of scattered around the region. The last, I think the last, maybe second to last, thriving without growth. What if, kind of our strategy is about infill development, but we're still experiencing a declining population? Are there ways that we can do a better job of stormwater management, of addressing urban heat islands, of making the city, despite the population loss, making the city, kind of really comfortable, accommodating, safe, and healthy for the people who remain? So here's just one thing, kind of going to get to the end here. If you take all of the cities in the Great Lakes, all the major cities of the Great Lakes that have lost population since 1950, and add up all that population, the total loss of population in the cities you see listed here is 3.6 million people, right? So 3.6 million people. These cities were built to accommodate that many more people than currently live in these communities. So Los Angeles is 3.8 million people. I'm not suggesting that we could move all of Los Angeles to these cities. It's not like politically and culturally likely, although it's mathematically possible. That's the argument that I'm trying to make here. Look, these cities together, Phoenix, Miami, Las Vegas, New Orleans, 3.2 million, if you add up their populations, all four together. So if we do reach a point in this country where parts of our nation are really difficult and unsafe to live, theoretically, as a mathematical argument anyway, we could think about the ways that people could relocate here. And although that may seem far-fetched, kind of keep in mind, like the Great Migration, right? I mean, lots of people, kind of moved to the older industrial cities when they were new cities of the Great Lakes. And then, kind of as globalization took hold, lots of people left these cities. So population movement is not unusual in our part of the country. I'm not saying that we should, kind of make a space for Las Vegas. I'm just saying that we should think about it because the possibility and the, kind of the opportunities as well as the challenges are definitely here. What I'm really suggesting is that maybe instead of thinking just about land use at the neighborhood, citywide, and regional scale, that at some point we're going to have to think about land use strategies at the national level. This map shows existing land use conditions, but that's not the same thing, as you know, that's not the same thing as planning. If this is what the composite of land use across the U.S. looks like, the continental U.S. that is, kind of what do we want to envision, kind of for the next 40 to 50 years? How do we want to think about our country and what should and could happen where? How can we, kind of rethink land use at the national scale in a way that contributes to a reduction of harm, to a reduction of greenhouse gases, and helps to get to a more stable place in terms of climate? And how do you know, right? I mean, how do you know, like even right now, that there aren't people moving into your communities from other parts of the country? How do we know like which of these scenarios is actually beginning to play out? I mean, all the tools that planners already have available to them, the census, these kind of tools are really useful. I also suggest here the trend report that APA does. I always keep an eye on that. There are a lot of things in the trend report that may not be relevant to our region, and so it's important to kind of look at things that, kind of might be important to our region, that definitely will, that are really likely to happen and maybe less likely to happen. That's what the diagram on the right is suggesting. But keeping track and keeping an eye out for things that look like we might be heading in one direction or another enables you to kind of anticipate what's to come and put the tools in place so that, kind of when change happens, and it will, right? I mean, that's why we plan, is because change is always happening, that we're a little bit more prepared for it and that we have the tools and policies and plans that we need in order to, kind of continue to advocate for better cities. Our work, which is a guide to scenario planning for in-migration in the Great Lakes, is available through the Lincoln Institute of Land Policy's website. I would have put the URL up here, but it's like really long. If you just Google exploratory scenario planning in the Great Lakes, it'll come, or you can just go to our website and you can download it right there. I was told that we don't have time for questions, so if you disagree with me or whatever, I'm easy to find. I'll be hanging out here for a while, but thank you. I appreciate your time and attention, and I hope to talk to some of you further about some of these issues. So thank you.
Actually, everyone, we do have a couple more moments that we can have a couple questions. So if you raise your hand, I can come over with a microphone, and you can ask your questions to Terry.
All right. Can you hear me? Hey, Terry. Hey. This is Joyce. Question for you about Lake Erie itself. Has there been any study or scenario planning about what might happen to the lake itself? Like, will it recede? Will it flood? Like, what's going to happen with Lake Erie?
So Lake Erie is the shallowest and warmest of the Great Lakes, which is really amazing for biodiversity. There are more wildlife and creatures living in the lakes in Lake Erie than any of the other lakes, but it also makes it the most vulnerable, which I'm sure you know, Joyce. Yeah, and I mean, we certainly have had a wake-up call, right? I mean, with the issues that Toledo has had in the not-too-distant past about, kind of water quality. If our future hinges on the health of the Great Lakes, maybe all of our plans should, kind of focus on those kinds of questions. There are lots of studies that suggest what could happen in the Great Lakes, but, until we get serious about reducing, kind of the amount of phosphorus and contamination in the lakes, also the question of fracking, right? I mean, fracking both puts the Great Lakes at risk from contamination, but also just in terms of water usage. And I didn't even get into it, but there's also the Great Lakes Compact, right? If our region loses population, continues to lose population, and continues to lose political clout, we talk about the West running out of water, but we know how to build pipes, right? I mean, you could sort of imagine the Great Lakes kind of being piped across to the Colorado River so that, kind of where the money and the political power is in the Southwest would have access to this resource. What I hope, regardless of where you live and work in the region, we all need to fight for the health of the Great Lakes Compact, which you probably know says that the water in the Great Lakes Basin needs to remain in the Great Lakes Basin. Pumping the water out to another part of the country would probably be the ecological death of the Great Lakes system, which is more than 20% of the world's fresh water. So it's something we have to protect as if our lives depended on it, because they do. But, on the other hand, in the interest of like scenario planning being, kind of open to the possibilities, if suddenly the Great Lakes Basin, the water of the Great Lakes, were a national resource rather than a regional one, maybe more federal dollars would come that would enable us to put some water, because we do have flooding issues, some water into other parts of the region in ways that wouldn't damage the lake. I haven't seen any research on these kinds of questions. I'm just saying that the possible scenario, kind of added political interest. When it's in the whole country's interest to protect the Great Lakes, we might start seeing more serious protections. But right now, it's kind of up to us, and I think that we, kind of need to commit to that in a really intentional way.
Terry, this is Alex, past student. Um, so I'm interested in if you think there is an ideal, flexible scenario that we can plan for or that can accommodate maybe multiple outcomes from the scenario planning exercise.
Yeah. So I have to say one of the great pleasures of being here today is not just seeing all of you, but seeing so many of my former students. Hi, Alex. Hi, Arthur. But yeah, I mean, I don't believe in ideals, only because there are so many things that we just don't know. So I guess I would say that, kind of the advantage of exploratory scenario planning is to, kind of envision the possibilities and plan for the best possible outcomes depending on what happens. I don't mean to be unspecific, but I can't tell you, when I was younger and started my career, I used to believe that you could do a master plan and implement a master plan and it would look like the thing you did at the beginning by the time you get to the end. But I've worked here in Cleveland for over 30 years and now I kind of don't believe that anymore. You start one way, but by the time you get to the other end, things have all changed. I would say that if we can, as a region, commit to certain principles, the protection of the Great Lakes, kind of focus on, kind of, as Norm Krumholtz would say if he was here, protecting the needs of people and providing choices for people who lack them. If we can kind of collectively commit to a series of goals and ideals, how those play out and how you plan for them in your own communities can have a wide amount of variation. As long as we're kind of on the same page of overall what we want to accomplish, the individual actions, can kind of align in a lot of different ways.
There we go.
Thank you. Fair warning, I'm the non-planner in this room, so apologies if this is a really dumb question. But your slide about people leaving after Katrina and where they went really resonated with me, and the point about people went generally where they had family members and there were job opportunities, so that total sense. I also noticed that they went to places where the climate was somewhat similar to where they left. So for those of us, and more broadly the Northeast Ohio, for Ohio overall, if someone doesn't have family here, and if our weather is so different than what they are leaving, from a public policy standpoint, what should we also be thinking about to make this region or the state a more attractive option for people to move into?
Yeah, that's a really excellent question. Sometimes people think I'm not a planner either. My practice is a little outside of maybe normal planning, so no worries at all on that. I think that some of the things we can be doing are kind of communication. Not just about sort of selling ourselves as a climate haven, but like specifically what is available here. Affordable housing, access to water. I believe that maybe the first step needs to be about attracting businesses because to the point you just made, people come for employment opportunities, and so the beauty of the Great Lakes Compact means that if you're a business in the Great Lakes Basin, you have access to this resource that businesses and industries outside of the region don't have. That's why we used to have a lot of breweries along the Great Lakes. And maybe, kind of attracting water-intensive businesses back to the region. And there's certainly organizations working on these issues. I think that might be the first step because people do move because they know somebody or they have an opportunity to work. So my suspicion is that, kind of the first step will be, kind of to increase and expand the range of businesses and industries. I'm particularly interested in opportunities for food-producing businesses and food processing businesses. Given that Ohio is already a stronghold in this area, what are the ways that we can kind of continue to grow and expand food production at all scales in a way that create employment opportunities, and then make sure that, again, both the people who are already here have access to those jobs, because there are a lot of people who need that, as well as people kind of moving into our region.
Any other questions? Going once, twice? All right. Terry, thank you very much. Another round of applause for our keynote speaker, everyone, Terry Schwartz.